All right, hello. In today's video, we are going to be talking about agency, the idea of agency, what is agency, who has agency, how do we use literary devices to communicate agency. So let's get started. Agency is basically a word that means power. So if you have agency, you have power over a particular situation. So when we think about the sentence, who has power, we can replace it with the sentence, who has agency. Emmanuel just walked in when I'm making this video. You're gonna watch this in a few weeks. Okay. Okay, so when you're thinking who has power, you're also, the same question is, who has agency? So there are some things that you have agency over in your life. Maybe you are a person who believes that you have agency over your destiny. Meaning that you control your future, you control what you're going to be doing, you have agency, you have the power. Maybe a time when you're feeling powerless or when you don't have the agency is when your parents take away your cell phone because they control the cell phone bill. So then maybe that would sound something like, my parents have agency over my cell phone and I am powerless when they take it away from me. So agency is all about power. Agency itself is not a literary device. Agency is just an idea, just like power is an idea. Literary devices that have the potential to help us communicate agency, so a couple literary devices to look out for when you're trying to figure out who or what has agency in this particular quote or scene, is to think about passive voice and to think about personification. Let's first talk about what passive voice is. So if you take out the handout that I gave you, we can look at this. This is a little bit more about agency. You can read about that if you want to. So here's our first key point for the day. How can the use of language of the text to determine whether or not Macbeth or other characters have agency? Here we go with passive voice. We're thinking about who or what is in control at the moment. Study the verbs used to determine if they are an active or passive voice. All right, here we go. So in this particular example, we have passive voice here. The brakes were slammed on by her as the car sped downhill. How do I know this is passive voice? The subject is unclear of who is doing this. The subject comes second and the object comes first. In this active voice example, she, the subject, comes first and then the object comes second. She slammed on the brakes as the car sped downhill. This is active voice, this is passive voice. Again, in active voice, the subject comes first, object comes second. Oftentimes in passive voice, the object comes first and the subject comes second. Here's another example of passive voice. Your bicycle has been damaged. It's unclear here who or what the subject is. What damaged the bicycle? Who damaged the bicycle? All we know is that the bicycle, the object, the receiver of the action was damaged. So it's unclear who has agency, who has the power in this sentence. Conversely, I have damaged your bicycle is written in active voice. Subject comes first, object comes second. It's very clear who exactly has the power, who has damaged the bicycle. So here's a couple more examples. Active voice, I lost the keys. Subject, I, object, keys. In passive voice, it would be the keys were lost. Object, it's unclear who did this. Hamlet murdered his uncle is active voice. Subject is Hamlet, object is uncle. Passive voice is Uncle Claudius was murdered. Uncle Claudius is the object. It's unclear who the subject is. Romeo and Juliet sacrificed everything to be together. Romeo and Juliet are the subjects. It's clear who the actor is here. So what does this mean for agency? Basically, if a sentence is written in passive voice, it suggests that the agency belongs to someone else, or it's not clear who has power in the sentence. So if we look at the keys example, I lost the keys. I have agency here. I am the one who did this action. In the passive voice example, the keys were lost. It seems as though nobody has agencies. Nobody has agency. The keys have agency. Who lost the keys? Who did this action? It's unclear. In this second example, Hamlet murdered his uncle. Hamlet is the one who has agency. Hamlet has the power. He's the one who did the action very clearly. In the passive voice example, Uncle Claudius was murdered. We don't know who has agency. We don't know who has power. The other device to look at when we're thinking about agency is personification. So in personification, inanimate objects have power. Okay, sorry, interruption from Ms. Singletary, rude. Okay, so back to personification. Thinking about whether inanimate objects have power or a human has power. In personification, an inanimate or an inhuman object is said to have human qualities, as you know. Let's look at some examples. The wind was so strong, it blew us off course and shipwrecked our boat on a deserted island. In this particular example, the wind has agency. The wind is being personified to say that the wind blew us off course. When a character has agency, there's usually a lack of personification. So, I'm a terrible sailor. I didn't know what to do in the storm, so I lost control of the ship and subsequently shipwrecked us. Oops. In this case, it's very clear that the sailor is the one who has the agency, who has the power. This happened because of the sailor. In this one, the wind has the agency. Let's look at another example. The victory fell on us. In here, the inanimate object, victory, is being personified to fall. Victory can't actually fall. Victory has the power here. The victory fell on us. In this other example, there's no personification and the character has agency. If the character were to say, I'm an awesome warrior, my violence and bloodlust and amazing abilities with the sword helped us win the battle. There's no personification there, therefore the character has agency. Oftentimes when you see personification, some inanimate or inhuman object has agency. Okay, let's look at a couple practice ones. So we have a couple here from Romeo and Juliet, and then we have a couple from Macbeth that you're going to do on your own. So in these examples, we're trying to determine who or what has agency in these quotes. So here we go. After Romeo stabs Tybalt, the stage directions read, they fight, Tybalt falls. By using the passive Tybalt falls, rather than saying Romeo stabs Tybalt, it takes the agency and therefore the guilt and the power away from Romeo. It's almost written as if Tybalt just falls of his own accord or was fated to do so. So in this particular case, we see passive voice. Passive voice is the device. Romeo is stripped of his agency. Immediately after Tybalt falls, Romeo says this line, oh, I am fortune's fool. When I'm wondering here who has agency, I'm going to think to myself, do I see an example of passive voice? Do I see personification? And in fact, I do see personification. Romeo calls himself Fortune's fool. Fortune is personified in the sentence, thereby making Fortune in control of Romeo in his foolish actions. So let's look at this one right here. Sorry. When the nurse comes to tell Juliet that Romeo killed Tybalt but doesn't explain it well, Juliet's response is this. What devil art thou, that dost torment me thus? If Romeo be slain, say I, or if not, no. Brief sounds determine of my weal or woe. So, the question here is, who or what has agency? What you should be looking for is, do I see any examples of passive voice in here, or do I see examples of personification? So take a second and try to determine, in this quote from Juliet, do you see any passive voice? Do you see any personification? Okay, so in this example, I see personification right here. The brief sounds are determining her happiness or her sadness. The brief sounds are personified, and therefore the sounds have agency, have power over Juliet's happiness or her despair. So you can go ahead and write that there. What I want you to do now is do this example here. Who has agency here? Again, look for personification, look for passive voice. If you see those things, likely there's something happening with agency. And then I want you to look at these couple of examples from Macbeth, who or what has agency in this quote, who or what has agency in this quote. There will be a brief quiz tomorrow on agency, and then we will examine it more in Act 2, Scene 1. Okay, bye.